sandwich, right? So we've talked a lot about the turd. Let's talk a lot about let's talk a little bit at least about that next slice of bread, right? Success. Success and failure are connected, are they not? Right? What do we typically tend to do when we do our 8-8-hour, right? What do we focus on when we do our AARs? We focus on you sucked at this, you sucked at this, you sucked at this, you sucked at this. Yeah, you did this good, and you sucked at this, right? I was reading an article on the Harvard Business Review website before jumping into this call, and I just wanted to kind of challenge myself, like, hey, here we're going to talk about failure and how awesome it is. Like, well, what do people say about success and failure? And there's a completely competing body of evidence that says success is a better teacher. And then another one that I think when I read, and I'm like, nah, I don't know. So I kind of read deeper down into it and read some other articles, whatever, looked at some different things, and they talk about combining both. We combine success and we combine failure, right? Like and you start talking about positive and negative reinforcement. What if when we do these 8-8-hours, we actually focus as much on failure, on success as well? What if we give them both the same amount of attention instead of always focusing on failure? Because you talk about like training animals, right? Which one works better, negative or positive reinforcement? Which one do you get more results out of? It can depend, right? So why do we always focus on simply one approach? And this goes back to a thought I had a while back that I didn't get to put out, but I'm a freaking nerd, and I wanted to say this is like Schrodinger's situation, right? I have a cat that's dead and alive, right? That's what's going on here. Oh, success is the best. No, failure is the best. They're both the best. Yeah, bullshit, whatever. But yeah. But what do you guys think about, not leaving success completely out of the equation and just talking about failure? Like, why is it that we focus on failure so much is really the point of this whole tirade.
Well, so
go ahead, Bill.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Dan. So what I do now, we have an after action review at the end of every hurricane season, right? And in the civilian world, anyway, it's getting someone to talk about a failure is really hard. I'm, again, come from the, when, Paul Pladsen was our QA guy at Aviano, and he would just eviscerate me, so I'm used to that for after action reviews, like you're talking about, Brad. You did this wrong, you screwed that up, what an idiot, that kind of stuff. But on the civilian side, it's all about, oh yeah, that was great, we really need to continue doing that, and nobody wants to talk about the failure. So there really does need to be a balance. The cat needs to be dead and alive.
Yeah, and Brad, I was just going to answer your question. In your environment, the answer is that there's less failures than there are successes, and for you guys, success is a standard. So that's probably why it's probably focused on more at that particular time. But again, I'm totally with Bill here. I was just going to actually talk about that. It's like it's a completely different in the civilian world. So brace yourself for all that. It's a big change coming your way, Brad, sooner than later. And, anyways, but it's a bit more of a challenge on how you do address that. But I do try to address it in your same approach, where I think they both coexist, because it is usually a result of one or the other, and it kind of goes back to that conflict leads to resolution. Same type of thought here on it, but we've had this just at work last week. Leadership basically who are out of touch with the day-to-day stuff saw a problem. They took a harsh action on a gentleman that I did not agree with whatsoever, because it was one of those negative reactions. They talked about this one failure, but did not address all his successes. And basically he's a sales guy who is having his most remarkable month ever, and really excelling everything. And while he's in full momentum, finally performing at the level he wanted, he made one mistake. You want to take him back. Then he comes back. They suspended him. Comes back for the next week. He doesn't do any sales. His motivation's not there, and it was bad. And to fix that, well, we motivated him with money. So that was it. But then I was like, look what we just did to someone, where we could have fix this before it even became a problem. Now, in terms of production, we lost a good 2 weeks of production out of one guy because of that little idea of identifying a failure as opposed to building this guy up through his success. So a good question, by the way.
Dan, I think what you brings up like, or resonates with, like, think about how toxic of a culture it creates when you feel like you're under the gun, you like that, right? Where it's like, oh, one slip up and it's over, right? Or I'm automatically going to face like this very adverse action, because people are fallible. We are prone to making mistakes, right? And so if it's done wrong, like you said, you're going to lose all this production. Not only that, you're going to create an environment where maybe it becomes like a dog-eat-dog world, right? Where people are not going to want to take responsibility or accountability for their actions, and they're going to start just pointing fingers at everybody. And it creates this very toxic work environment that, as far as production goes, I think, really tears away at it.
I was looking for earlier something to help me explain the relationship between success and failure. I was looking for a rubber band because I want to get a little quantum here. Brad knows how much I love quantum, reading about quantum physics. So I think success and failure are always related. So if we put a ball right here, that's success. This is from a mask, and this is failure. At any given moment, they could be here, they could be here, they could be here, they could be oscillating. It all depends when you look at it in space and time, what actually is a success and what is actually a failure. But I think they're still always connected, and they're still part of each other, because when an observer looks at here, just like we discussed, maybe a certain time and space in the past that this was a failure. But once removed from it 10 years later, I can probably show you where that same instance, it could be viewed as a success as well. So this is how I use elements of physics and quantum stuff to relate some of these principles. They're a bit dualistic and stem from like Buddhism and stuff, but I think the principle still applies.
So on that note, then, in that same scenario, right, a successful, I mean, I guess it would be hard to quantify like what would have been a successful response, but I guess the action itself is a lesson, right? In that there's a success in the failure of maybe taking too much of an adverse action, and then the success derived from that is the lesson that we've learned in the lost productivity. And, is this really what our institution or organization values, right? Is this was the juice worth the squeeze, I guess, to say. But
I mean, the big thing that sticks out to me is how many great intentions to set up new programs. How many great new ideas do people coming in new positions have to implement this and implement that? And sometimes I have seen people think that just redoing something should be considered a success. The fact that it was revamped or a new program was made is a success. So
right.
That's how one person can view this happening right here. However, on the other hand, I look over here and all the fucking time and money was wasted on this stupid procurement, and we couldn't get the robots that we needed with good comms in time. That to me is a fucking failure. So they're both related. It all depends on who's observing. That's the way I look at it.
So success can be done wrong too then. And we can sometimes celebrate mediocrity, right? Like, yeah, I see the EPR all the 6 stuff coming up. And
yeah.
And like when I think back to my early days in the career field, where I did feel brought in or like successful, I guess, It didn't look anything like that, right? It was this acceptance of the group, of this group that I wanted to be a part of. And it parallels like what I defined as success as a young kid. I remember I used to work the summers with my grandpa doing plumbing jobs, and he used to just dump me on work sites and be like, dig a trench from here to here when they were, laying new sewer lines or whatever. And I was like, man, this kind of sucks, but all right. And then when the days that like I really committed myself to that and I do a good job, like it wasn't reciprocated in money or anything like that. It was like grandpa would be like, we're gonna go out to dinner, and then he'd be like, and I'm taking Alex with me, and getting to hang out with him, and then him talking to me kind of like as a no longer like as a little kid, but like as a man. That was huge, right? So success can be done wrong as well. Like to Brad's point about, how we always focus on failure. I think it's good to focus on success, but we have to do it right. We can't just like, oh, here, let me, like they teach us in the counseling training, right? Like, here's all the bad stuff. Now let me close with something nice or something good, because then if it's not genuine, if it's not real,
Bookending.
right, then it could be done wrong too.
Yeah. I mean, I think the whole point of this is to understand the relationship between the two and not, I guess in my mind, I always end up having more questions than answers from out of these, resolution, I guess in my mind, looks more about shared ideas and perspectives. And like, I'll talk about one thing that doesn't have anything to do with EOD, and then sometimes I see Brad or Dan, shaking their head, and it's like, okay, they're picking up something that I'm putting down. Poof, it's like another question. That makes me think about this. And for me personally, I think I'm gaining a lot of perspective about this because it's easy in the moment to feel, at least for myself, like there's a whole bunch of failure. But I think it's also important to discuss that that's what it feels like most of the time when we're going through something. It's hard to see that perspective when we're in it. But once we're on the other side of something, sometimes we can see a little clearer. Dan.
Mari, me and you are working really well together today because you just transitioned right into exactly something I wanted to say.
We got the ESPN.
I really do, because one of the things